Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rochford District Council's remote meeting of the Audit Committee, and welcome to anybody who's watching this via our live stream. Our agenda item 1 tonight is apologies for absence. We have one apology for absence, and that is from Mr. Councillor Hoy. Are there any others? No. Agenda item 2, substitute members. I understand Councillor Wilson is substituting for Councillor Hoy. Agenda item 3, non-members attending.
Councillor FD.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of September 2020. Are the minutes agreed, members?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 6, which is the Redmond review. Naomi Lucas, the Council's Assistant Director of Resources, will introduce this report. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform members of the conclusions and recommendations arising from the independent review into the oversight of local audit and transparency of local authority financial reporting, otherwise known as the Redmond Review, which is attached as an appendix to the paper. This report has arisen out of an inquiry that was launched by the Secretary of State for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government in July last year to support the transparency and quality of local authority financial reporting and external audits. The Secretary of State appointed Sir Tony Redmond to conduct this review, and he was tasked with examining the existing purpose, scope and quality of statutory audits of local authorities in England and the supporting regulatory framework in order to determine whether it was operating in line with policy intent, whether the introduction of the 2014 Local Audit and Accountability Act had improved the effectiveness of the control and governance framework, along with the transparency of financial information presented by councils. And thirdly, the current statutory framework for local authority financial reporting, and whether that supported the transparent disclosure of financial performance and enables users of the accounts to hold local authorities to account. The report is summarised in the covering report. It is fairly lengthy in terms of the number of areas of exploration and recommendations, but yeah, the conclusions and proposals are summarised within that, but I would just like to draw members' attention to a couple of key areas that particularly affect us as a local authority. So if I could refer members to paragraph 4.10 at page 6.8. So this specifically refers to the government's governance arrangements in place for responding to audit recommendations. And there's 3 recommendations that the Redmond Review has made to local authorities. The first of which is that an annual report should be submitted back to full council by the external auditor after the accounts have been considered by Audit Committee, whether or not those accounts have actually been certified by that point in the year. Secondly, to give consideration to the appointment of at least one independent member who is suitably qualified to the Audit Committee. And thirdly, to put in place a facility for the Chief Executive Officer, the Monitoring Officer and the Chief Financial Officer to meet with the key audit partner at least annually, and that to make that a formal requirement. So in terms of the recommendations of this report, which will be put forward to you shortly, I would just like to inform members that we're recommending that this audit committee should refer a report of the annual accounts back to full council each year. Obviously, full council has delegated the approval of the accounts to the audit committee, so that delegation would still stand. It would essentially be reporting back the findings and outcomes of the audit to council so that they're fully aware and it's fully transparent to all members. The second point about appointing potentially an independent member to the committee, welcome to have a discussion and debate about at this meeting, but I think we're proposing that we might bring something further back to a future meeting on that one. So maybe we'll return to that point. And the third recommendation about the chief officers meeting with the audit representative each year, that is already actually in place, and that already happens, so we're compliant with that. Before we actually move to the recommendations and any discussion around those, I would just like also to say that the recommendations of the review are basically good practice, but they're not actually formally statutorily required at this point. It may be that some of the recommendations do actually be formalised and brought it into the statute book, but at the moment it's voluntary in terms of whether we choose to adopt these recommendations. But I would just say to members that several other councils are choosing to implement some of these recommendations voluntarily. So it's something that I would advise members to give some serious consideration to, in line with best practice. Obviously, there is a number of other recommendations that are a bit broader within the report. So again, if anyone's got any particular questions on any of those, I can try and answer them as best I can. So I think that's all I'll say at this point. And yeah, I'll try to pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Naomi? No.
Yeah. Sorry, I have got my hand up, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, having read this report with great interest, this just seems to me that we were already doing everything that the government asked us to do. We ticked all the boxes. They've just done a review of their own procedures, and that basically are updating it. Or am I missing the point here?
If I may come back, Chair.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that, yeah, the findings are quite broad ranging, as I said. I think in terms of whether local authorities have adopted them, obviously there will be some variability across different local authorities. As you say, I think a number of the points we are already compliant with, but that might not be the case across all local authorities. But I think the broader intention of the report is to actually examine the sustainability and the effectiveness of external audit firms and actually the viability of the audit market. I think all members who've been on this committee before will know that we've discussed at length previously that obviously the external audit firms are struggling with resource, and that has impacted on the ability to meet deadlines in terms of signing off the annual accounts. And there's also been some bearing in terms of the fees and the sustainability of the fee levels. So I think what this report is trying to recommend is proposals that will increase the stability and the sustainability of the audit market and mean that there's greater certainty around the annual accounts process each year for authorities, which I think in broad terms we would support those findings, because as I say, there has been some issues in terms of being able to get our accounts signed off by the deadline last year, for example, and I think that's only going to continue into the future.
Chairman, can I just come back on that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. I agree with what you're saying, but going from what having seen this over the years, all we've had to do is do what the government asked us to do. They were the ones that dictated who the auditors should be, how it was processed, all the fees that were set. I mean, this was all stuff outside our remit, as far as I'm aware, unless I've got it badly wrong. But you know, we've done everything that's been asked of us, and now we've got to go jump through some more hoops.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to note when I went into the webinar and listened in that 40% of the councils hadn't completed their accounts in the year 18-19, and it was getting worse after that. So I think we've done really well to have our accounts in on time each year. I know we struggled last year a bit, but we did get ours in. So that there is a number of councils struggling throughout the country. Any further questions?
Chairman, Councillor Lucas Gill has a question.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of an aside from what Naomi has just said. I've got the feeling that this is going to massively increase the fees that we as a council have to pay auditors. Because let's face it, they haven't done a very good job, time-wise, certainly. But also, I've noticed in the financial pages that EY are in trouble again with work that they've done for other companies.
If I may come back, Chair, just on the point of fee levels, I think, again, as we've discussed previously, the sustainability of fee levels has been a particular issue, and the Redmond review itself anticipates that there may be fee increases of around 25% going forward in order to maintain a functioning audit sector. I think, as we've ourselves have experienced, although the fee levels were set significantly lower when the audit, the external audit function was essentially outsourced from the Audit Commission, that since then, although the base fees have been set fairly low, we have experienced additional fees on top of that each year. So I think to some extent we are already experiencing those increases in fees. It's just not in a transparent and sort of sustainable way. So again, while obviously we want to ensure we're getting value for money out of the audit services that we receive, in some ways, I do support the idea that it would be better that those fees are more transparent and upfront in the first place, rather than them sort of being added on as additional fees each year, which obviously makes it harder to budget and to know what those fees are going to be going forward.
Thank you, Naomi.
Any further questions?
Yeah, Chairman, can I just come back? Are we still obliged to operate with this small select band that the government tell us we can choose from?
Yeah.
So again, Chair, if I may, so we, as I think I've probably said in previous meetings, so we've opted in via the public sector auditor appointments process to actually be part of a kind of collective procurement, which means that we are essentially given an auditor each year. It is possible to opt outside of that process and appoint your own auditor. Having said that, I think the fee levels, were we to procure that ourselves, were again likely to be higher than those if they're procured collectively. And secondly, there's just not really an active market and to actually go and appoint externally. And in actual facts, many of the big audit firms are trying to step back from public sector audit work because it's not sustainable for them. So I think on both counts, although it's feasibly possible, it's probably not going to deliver any better service or better price for us as a council.
Okay.
Chair, I'll put my hand up.
It's Councillor Lauren Shaw. This is
Sorry,
no,
do that.
sorry, in the corporate world, but I think you've just answered it really. You can negotiate a fee with the auditor. Can't we do this in public sector? I know we've got to have these auditors, but can't we actually negotiate a fee so we know what an upfront fee we're paying?
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Again, I think I'd probably refer back to my previous point, and it is feasible, but obviously there is some external factors which determine both the amounts of work that's required and the price associated with that. So even if we were to opt out of the kind of joint procurement process via PSAA and appoint our own auditor, we could perhaps negotiate a price, but I'm not convinced it would be any better value for money for the council. And secondly, as I said, I think it would be just difficult to find anyone that's particularly interested in auditing a small local authority, just because of the amount and complexity of work that's involved, particularly these days as more and more sort of requirements get added each year, means that it's just not really an attractive proposition for a lot of the audit firms to actually come and do the work.
Yeah, can I come back? Sorry, you missed my point. I know
Sorry.
we've got to have the auditors we've got. I can understand that. But with the auditors we must have that the government has said, can't we negotiate a fee with them? Not go out and look for other auditors. The auditors that we've got, can we not, Ernst & Young, can't we just say, well, we want what is the fee you're going to charge us? Can't we negotiate that up front? So then we know exactly what you've got a budget for.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Shaw. Sorry, I apologise if I slightly missed your point before. So in terms of how we agree the fee each year, so at the beginning of each 3-year kind of procurement process, there's basically a base level fee that is set. So that was actually negotiated a couple of years ago now, before the start of the new contract. But they effectively can't price in all of the unknowns and the risks. So particularly to give an example of the COVID related situation this year, where there's additional significant additional work that the auditors will have to perform in light of all the COVID risks, that they couldn't necessarily have anticipated that when they set the base level fee. And I think the other point that we have had negotiations or sort of discussions with the auditors about is the extra levels of regulations and sort of changes to the audit and accounting standards each year, which again, some of the things around pensions, for example, couldn't have been foreseen when they set the original fees. So I'm not here to defend the audit firms, but I think in fairness that they do have to perform a significant amount of additional work that they wouldn't necessarily have known when they set the original contract. And that's the point where we do have discussions and negotiate to some degree each year what the appropriate fee level is. But I think the point of this wider report is that I think it recognises that across the sector, regardless of what each individual authority's individual situation is, it's just not sustainable as a sector at the moment. And the danger is that if all the big audit firms pull out, there just won't be anyone available to actually do the work at all across the whole of the sector. So I think we have to perhaps just recognise a little bit wider than just outside Rochford that something's probably got to change.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else with any further questions. So members, at paragraph 9.1 on pages 6.9 and 6.10, there are 4 recommendations. Recommendation 1 and 4 are for noting. Number 1 is that the report and the 3 recommendations to local authorities be noted. And number 4, that it be noted that the Chief Executive Officer, the Monitoring Officer and the Chief Financial Officer currently have the facility to meet with the key audit partner at least annually. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
Noted, Chairman.
Noted.
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 Yes, noted.
Right, thank you. Members, turning to recommendation 2, I support the principle of the committee providing an annual report to council on the accounts. I would therefore like to move the following recommendation: that the Audit Committee provides an annual report to Council on the accounts as soon as possible after the Audit Committee has considered them. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Right, voting will be done by a roll call of names. When Sonia calls out your name, please indicate if you wish to have a recorded vote and then whether you are voting for or against the recommendation, or if you wish to abstain.
So Councillor Mrs Butcher.
Don't want a recorded vote and for the recommendation.
Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. No and for.
Councillor Ioannou.
No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and for.
Councillor Merrick.
No and for.
Councillor Milne.
No recorded vote and for the recommendation.
Councillor Newport.
No and for.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No and for, thank you.
Councillor Mr Shaw.
No and for, thank you.
Councillor Sperring.
No and for.
Councillor Wilson.
No and for.
That's unanimously approved, Chairman.
Right, thank you. So that has been carried. Right, recommendation 3, that the recommendation to appoint at least one independent member suitably qualified to the Audit Committee be considered. Members, I feel more detailed information is needed on how this might work in principle before forming a view on this. I would suggest asking officers to come back to the committee with a role profile for an independent person and details of appropriate allowance and how that role will fit in with the current audit committee. I would therefore like to move the following recommendation: that a report on the proposed independent person role be brought back to the next meeting of the committee for consideration. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Thank you. Again, voting will be done by a roll call of names. When Sonia calls out your name, please indicate if you wish to have a recorded vote and then whether you are voting for or against the recommendation, or if you wish to abstain.
Councillor Mrs Butcher.
No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. No and for.
Councillor Ioannou.
And no recorded vote and for.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and for.
Councillor Merrick.
No and for.
Councillor Milne.
No and for.
Councillor Newport.
No and for.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No and for, thank you.
Councillor Shaw, Mr Shaw.
No and for.
Councillor Sperring.
No and for.
And Councillor Wilson.
No and for.
Unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. So that has been carried. So we now turn to agenda item 7, Local Code of Corporate Governance. Angela Law, Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic, will introduce the report. Angela?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Members, the Local Code of Corporate Governance was first adopted in 2017 in line with the framework and the guidance issued by SIPFA. The code itself is not a legal obligation, however, it is adopted by many local authorities as a matter of good guidance and practice. The code has recently been reviewed and it has been updated to align with the council's business plan, and it will assist with the in the completion of the annual governance statement. To assist members, the 7 core principles remain the same, and the main changes in the document can be seen on pages 7.8 to 7.9, where we have added the council's business plan. And from pages 7.10 onwards, the core principles remain the same, but the sub-principles have been amended with clear reference to the council's business plan and reference to what the objectives are under that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No further questions? Right, paragraph 7.1 on page 7.2, there's one recommendation, that the local code of corporate governance be agreed. Again, voting will be done by a roll call of names. When Sonia calls out your name, please indicate if you wish to have a recorded vote and then whether you are voting for or against the recommendation, or if you wish to abstain.
Councillor Mrs Butcher.
No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Mrs Carter.
Thank you. No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Ioannou.
No recorded vote and for.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
No and for.
Councillor Merrick.
No and for.
Councillor Milne. Councillor Milne, you're on mute.
So I pushed the bar and it didn't unmute for some reason. Yeah, no recorded vote and for.
Councillor Newport.
No and for.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No and for, thank you.
Councillor Mr Shaw.
No and for.
Councillor Sperring.
No and for.
Councillor Wilson.
No and for.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. So that motion has been carried. We now turn to agenda item 8, Audit Progress Report 2020-21. Mike Porter, our Chief Audit Executive, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask members to refer to section 1 of my report. As stated, since my last progress report in July, we have completed a further 2 audit engagements from the audit plan. The one we rated as adequate assurance relates to a review of the council's elections process in terms of the income and expenditure claim for that. The other piece of work where no assessments are awarded relates to work we undertake in relation to the housing benefit subsidy claim. This is work that we undertake on behalf of the external auditor. So what we do is undertake a check of a sample of housing benefit claims to confirm their accuracy and completeness. And this is a piece of work that Jim undertakes on behalf of the external auditor. Our work and the results of our work and then inform the further work undertaken by the external auditor. And this basically results in a reduced audit fee. So we actually undertake work on their behalf. They rely on our results and then it directs their further work. And the findings in relation to these pieces of work can be further analysed or seen at Appendix 2 and Appendix 3 to my report. If I can now move on to changes to the audit plan. Back in July, I mentioned that 2021 wouldn't be a normal year because of COVID, and that the audit plan would be subject to revision, mainly because of a result of audit resources being redirected elsewhere. Also, the change in risk environment, so there'd be changes to the risk environment, new emerging risks would come on board. So our audit plan would need to be changed to reflect these new emerging risks. The revised audit plan is provided for members at Enclosure 2, and at Enclosure 2, we are providing comments in terms of the audit and the scope of the audit, what it will now look like under COVID-19, and those audits we will no longer undertake. there are 5 audits that we are proposing will be deferred now until the following year. And these are because those audit areas we wish to now audit can't be audited because they haven't progressed as far as we would like. So we can't actually do an audit on those areas because resources or management resources have been directed elsewhere. So those audit areas can't be conducted at this moment in time. And also there's those areas we no longer want to visit at this moment in time because of the changing or emerging new risks. So as I said, the revised plan is provided at enclosure 2. If I can now move on to section 2 of my report, and this deals with counter fraud activity. As members may be aware that owing to COVID and to support local businesses, business grants have been payable to a number of businesses in the Rochford area. And this is part of an application process. So businesses can actually fill in an application and apply for these various respective grants. What we have done as an audit team and what is required by central government is to look at these payments and confirm they have been eligible for payment and there's no fraud, that basically businesses that didn't exist have made a claim. So what we're trying to do is check that every business that has been awarded a grant does exist or did exist as at March and was on the basic council tax database. So this is a piece of work that Jim's been looking at to inform or confirm that the payments we have made by Rochford are accurate and eligible. Also, in terms of basically fraud activity, the Rebs and Ben's team perform compliance functions, and they have achieved significant cashable savings over the period April to September of this year in the region of £77,000. So what they have identified is properties that have been unbilled in terms of council tax, and where discounts have been claimed or exemptions that no longer apply. Lastly, if I can ask members to refer to section 3 of my report, and this deals with audit recommendations. What we have seen is that we only have basically a limited number of live recommendations. Effectively, there are only 13 live recommendations at this moment in time. And what we have seen is a push back and forth of those by service managers. And that's quite understandable during COVID-19, is that these management, their priorities have changed and their basically activities are being directed elsewhere. So basically, there's 4 audit recommendations which have been pushed back in terms of implementation dates. And that's acceptable because we understand officers' time has changed and priorities have changed. Since the last progress, we've only introduced 2 new audit recommendations. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate what Mike said. I mean, we've been hearing him for a number of years now. Taking all these items in isolation, fine. But when we take them on block, is this creating a substantial increase in the workload for the accounts section? And will we be able to maintain, I appreciate what Mike said, where he said about some of them not meeting or being held back. Are we going to be able to comply with all the new bits and pieces that we're signing up for? I mean, we don't want to go back down the road where we were a few years ago. You know, we've made great headway over the last couple of years, and you know, I don't want us to find that we're going back where we once were. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I sort of understand the question. I mean,
yeah, I mean, basically, taking all these into account,
yeah.
Have we got the resources to deal with all the bits and pieces that we're now being asked to address? That's the long and the short of it.
Right. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. In terms of the audit resources, what we have available, Basildon Council, who I work for, so we can call on resources from Basildon Council. What I can assure members is the revised audit plan will be completed in its entirety. So basically, we do have the resources to complete the plan, and the plan will enable myself to give an opinion at year end. So basically, sufficient work will still be completed. We have the resources to undertake the revised audit plan. Why we revise it is that there are particularly audits that we can no longer undertake because they haven't been progressed. So there's nothing to actually audit in those areas. We haven't come as far as we'd like to, so we can't give an opinion on those areas because we haven't sufficiently progressed those areas of work. But in terms of all the other audit areas that are actually in the revised plan, yes, we've got sufficient resources, and Rochford Council can also call upon Basildon Council, my own council, to deliver parts of the plan, and that is what will happen this year. So yeah,
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's reassuring.
Councillor Lucas Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, there have been so many fraudulent claims throughout the country for millions of pounds of money. Is there much evidence of any in Rochford, and how much time is this taking you?
I mean, I could pass over to Jim for this piece, but from my examination of the work Jim's undertaken, there's no real evidence of fraud in relation to the payments we have made. Yes, there is widespread fraud, but like a number of councils, Rochford also introduced an application process. So basically, businesses initially had to apply for the grant, and this allowed us to undertake some initial checks to confirm they did exist, were legitimate businesses. And then on top of that, Jim's come in to sample check a number of the payments to confirm the checks we actually undertook. So there's a double check. So Revs and Bens have done their own checking to confirm whether these businesses are legitimate or not. And now we're coming in to double check that to make sure actually the processes were adequate and fit for purpose. And that's where Jim's come in to check a sample of those payments. But from the initial work, we're not seeing widespread evidence of fraud in Rochford. But Jim, do you have anything to add?
No, I think the Revenues and Benefits team have gone into the anti-fraud element of it in a bit of gusto, which I would expect nothing else from that team. They have identified a couple of fraudulent cases and did pass them on to the Department for Industry. They've taken on a big thing, but the team gone into it very conscientiously, and I've not found any evidence of any fraud within the revenues benefits items I looked at. Similarly, the economic development team have been processing the discretionary grants. Again, from my sample, that work still has some queries outstanding just for sort of clarification, but there's certainly no evidence I've seen of fraud in there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
There doesn't appear to be any further questions. So at paragraph 7.1 on page 8.2, there are 3 recommendations. Number 1, that the update on delivering the 2021 audit plan be noted. Number 2, that the conclusions and results from completed audit engagements in appendices 1 and 2 be noted. And number 3, that the updated status of audit recommendations in appendix 4 be noted. Are they noted, members?
Yes, noted.
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 Yep.
Noted.
Right, thank you. So we now go on to agenda item 9, which is the review of the council's risk register for 2021. Naomi Lucas, Assistant Director, will introduce the report. Naomi, please.
Thank you, Chair. So members of the committee will be aware that we consider the risk register twice a year, and generally we consider half the risks in the first 6 months of the year and the other half in the second 6 months of the year. In light of the sort of significant risks, particularly around the COVID situation, we took the decision earlier in the year in July to actually do a full review of the risk register. And we brought that back, as I say, to the July committee, at which time we'd reviewed each of the risks individually and made any appropriate amendments in light of COVID and other emerging risks. So for this time, we have reverted back to the normal pattern, and we've reviewed half of the risks, and the other half will be brought back to a subsequent audit committee. In light of that, there have been some minor changes around some of the wording of the control measures in place, but there's been no major changes either in terms of the risks reported or the scoring of the risks in terms of their likelihood and their impacts. We did take on board some comments at the last audit committee about risks which have a high residual risk rating, even after control measures are implemented. And in particular, last time we spoke about the risk of setting a balanced budget, which is risk number 9, and risk number 10, which is the inability to recruit and retain officers across the council. In addition, there's one further risk, health and safety, which remains high, and which we have spoken about in some detail at previous committee meetings. So we have expanded on the rationale behind the risk ratings for those in the report at paragraphs 5.1 to 5.4. And in addition, at section 6, we've noted the emerging issue of Britain's leaving the EU, obviously at the end of this year, and the fact that that may have some impacts on the risks within the risk register. We haven't got a specific risk around that because we are actually developing a specific risk register for Brexit specifically. In addition, we have also noted at section 7 the potential area of consideration around devolution and recovery white paper, which has been deferred now probably until summer of next year, which could obviously have a significant impact on the way local authorities are organised in the future. So yes, I'm happy to answer any particular questions members may have on the risk register. And yeah, the recommendations, I believe, are just for noting the risk register itself. Thank you.
So I can't see anybody wanting any questions. Does anybody want to ask a question? No. So at paragraph 13.1 on page 9.4, there's one recommendation that the content of the corporate risk register for 2021 be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
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 Right, well, thank you very much, everybody. We had a bit of a difficult start, but that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you all for attending and for your contribution in the meeting. And I now declare the meeting closed at 8:15 p.m.